Hey, how's it going? Hamish from Phoenix Sound Recording Studio here. Today we're in my live room. A couple of months ago I posted a thing on Instagram asking if anybody would be interested in how I set up to record remotely for clients, and a bunch of people said yes and that they'd like to see the process. So I figured today I would just take you through that process and how I work and what I've chosen, what I typically choose, why I choose them, where I place stuff, all that good stuff. So I guess we will start with the drums and my instruments and what I use and why I use those. This kit right now is a Mapex Saturn. It doesn't belong to me, it's my best mate's, but he was moving out of his house, he had nowhere to store it, he was going to go to America, and he kind of asked me if it was any use to me. So I said yes, and it ended up here, and it's been here ever since, and I love it. It sounds amazing, it's really nice, sounds great for recording, super punchy, really tight sounding, and just has these really nice tones when it's all tuned up and under the mics. So this is typically the setup that I choose if I'm doing like your average kind of rock record for a client remotely. It is a 22 by 20 kick, a 12 by 8 rack, and a 16 by 16 floor. I am playing Code Drumheads and Dream Cymbals. I'm very lucky to be endorsed by both of those companies. I love them. If you don't know them, go check them out. They're really sick. So what we will do is go through all the individual microphones, where they're placed, why I've chosen them, and kind of why I choose to put them where they are, and why I choose, you know, those microphones for those particular situations. So we'll start with kick. I have my phone here, which I will do some kind of close-ups of the stuff that's this side of the drum kit. So if you see that moving around, that's why that's there. So yeah, we will start with the kick. I'll get a shot of this afterwards, just so I can cut it in here and you can see it. But I run a Beta 52A on the interior, Shure Beta 52A, and then I run a sub kick mic that I built myself out of an old Wharfedale speaker. It was just the kind of sub portion of a Wharfedale that used to be attached to my vinyl player at home, and the tweeter stopped working, and I bought myself some nicer speakers, and I just took the sub out of that particular chassis and turned it into a mic, flipped the polarity. So that's what's going on there. It's pretty much like 48 to 50 hertz. That's kind of where its main focus is. So it's pretty down there, pretty subby. And that combined with the 52 kind of gives me pretty much the kick sound that I'm looking for. The kick placement is kind of about a third of the way into the drum. The 52 placement is about a third of the way into the drum there, and slightly off center from the actual where the beater hits the skin. And this is just to try and avoid too much kind of like smack and too much air going straight into it from the beater. I'm a pretty hard player, so there's quite a lot of air moving through the drum, and I tend to find that it just kind of piles up inside the drum, inside the mic, and doesn't really sound that good. So I found that moving it slightly off center just gives you a much more, or at least gives me a much rounder tone and much more like kind of realistic capture of the drum in that sense. So that's what's going on there. After that, we have my toms. They are both running the same microphone setup. And again, I will switch to this camera so you can kind of see it. So for starters, my rack tom, my snare, and my floor tom all have these very rustic looking homemade kind of spill baffles, which are just made out of acoustic foam with a hole cut in, and that just slides over the top of the microphone, and it basically cuts the cymbal bleed into this mic, cuts quite a lot of hi-hat bleed into my snare mic, and then again cuts all the ride, china, and crash into that mic. For mics, I am using the Aston Starlight, which is their small diaphragm condenser, pencil condenser. It's got a bunch of cool little features on it. It's got a 10 and a 20 dB pad. It has a roll-off around 80 hertz. It has a cool little voice setting. If I zoom in here, you might be able to see it. Yeah, so this little voice toggle switch has it has like a modern sound, a vintage sound, and then a blend of both. And again, yeah, these are both the same. They're both kind of positioned, you know, probably about 4 or 5 inches away from the skin, and I find that this just allows the kind of tone of the drum to resonate before it actually goes into the capsule. So I get a much more like realistic depiction of my tom here. And then again, my floor tom, very similar, one of these as well. And again, you know, 4 inches or so from the head, and it just allows the drum to bloom before it goes into the microphone. So you're capturing, for me, the most overall sound, plenty of attack, but you're also getting a nice like rounded kind of body from it. So yeah, that's my toms. Those have been my kind of mainstays for the last like year or so since I got them. I just think they sound awesome on toms. I was using 421s, these ones up here that you can see. I had those on originally and they just weren't quite cutting it for me. So I moved to these. I tried a bunch of stuff. I found these just worked really well. And so that's kind of how that stayed. Snare wise, I have again, another one of these baffles on my snare. This one's slightly bigger. And again, my hi-hats produce quite a lot of top end spill. So that's what I'm doing there. I'm trying to get rid of that as best I can. But microphone wise, again, I use the Beyerdynamic M201, which you can see here. I use this just purely because it's got like a slightly larger tip up at the lower end, around 200 hertz, 100 to 200 hertz, which is kind of where the body of the snare sits. So that's why I use that. It just means that I'm not there chucking in loads of low end, and whoever ends up mixing the stems that I send to the client doesn't need to smash in loads of low end as well. It's kind of already there. Quite a lot of people always struggle to pull in the low end of snare drums and the kind of body of the snare drum. So choose this microphone. It's a bit more focused in terms of its cardioid pattern, and it also has this nice kind of tip up at the bottom end. And then underneath that, it's, as far as I'm concerned, one of the least important microphones in terms of like what you choose for what you want. I just run, right now, I think I'm running an NT5. Let's have a look with this. See if I can see, yeah, so I've got an NT5 by Rode, that's down there. And again, I pretty much just use that microphone ultimately just to get the snares of the drum. So as long as it's got like a good crisp kind of high end, that's really all that's required. So that's what's going on there. I then have my overheads, which are SE Electronics SE5s. That's their small diaphragm pencil condenser. I think they came out with an SE8 after that, which was about half the size. They sound very similar. I had the SE5s. I love the way they sound. They're super focused. They're cardioid. So for me, they have like a really focused range, and it's kind of important for me in terms of, I like my cymbals to kind of give the overall stereo space of your drum kit. So I have these because it means that, you know, like they very much pick up like a focused area, which means that, you know, like when you pan them left and right, you really hear the difference between like the crash and the hi-hat over here on my left and the ride and the china over here on my right, and you get that spread. So that's what that's for. Again, I'm not entirely sure if this camera's picking them up, so I'll just show you what they look like. So this is what they look like. There's one there, and you've got one here. They are both 42 inches from the center of the snare drum, and that's just to help with the phasing alignment. Basically just means that when you hit the snare, that sound is reaching both of those at the same time, and you're not running into any phasing issues there. So that's what's going on there. And then what else have we got? We've got my hi-hat mic, which is the last of the close mics, which is an SM81. I'll show you what it looks like. There you go. It looks like this. And again, that's just kind of slightly off from the hi-hat. It's about 4 inches above the hi-hat. And it really, again, when that is brought into the mix and stuff, it's less about the tonality of the hi-hat for me, but it's more about the spatial situation again. So that's just pushed all the way to the left-hand side. From my perspective, if I was mixing it, that's where I'd have it. I mix from a drummer's perspective, so it would be on my left, and it's all the way over there, and it just helps separate, because you get quite a lot of snare hi-hat bleed in the snare mic. The snare is always dead center. If you don't have something to help it kind of position itself, i.e. the close mic, you start to get this big build-up of kind of hi-hat like dead in the center, and it kind of becomes a bit washy for everything. I mean, that's, you know, like obviously you can combat that with gating and that kind of stuff, but to try and alleviate it and try and give more option, I like to just have a close mic on the hi-hat as well, just so you can push it to the side if you want. Again, all these mics are set up purely based on my experience in my room and how it makes my drum sound within this room. Once they're delivered to the client can do whatever they want with them after that. It doesn't really bother me like how they go about mixing them, whether they omit any of them, whether they keep them, which actually leads quite nicely onto my room mics. So I will do some close-ups because I know they won't be in this shot, but behind me, behind these two baffles here, we have a trick that I stole from Warren Hewitt, who, if you don't know him, he has a cool YouTube channel. He's a great producer, made some great records, and this was something that he did on one of his episodes, I believe, where he was talking about how he got the drum sound for the record How to Save a Life by a band called The Fray. And partly what he did was set up two microphones behind the drum kit that were facing at the wall that was behind the drum kit. So as you'll see from this little close-up that I'll bring in now, I have two 57s that are placed both 6 foot away from the center of the snare drum, again for phasing. They're just directly smashing against the wall there. And then I have two SE-X1s that are probably about 2 foot off the ground facing the kick drum. Again, those are both 6 foot away from the drums. Same reason for the phasing. So that's what's going on there. And then the very last piece of the puzzle is a Neumann TLM 103, which I have over to my left, which is about 9 feet away from the drum kit, 9 feet away from me, which I have pushed up against the wall. The idea behind this is that it's all of the energy from the kicks, the snares and the toms hit the wall and just come straight back in this nice kind of slappy reflection straight back into the drum, straight back into the microphone. And then I put the Aston Halo reflection filter around the back of it. You'll see all of this in the close-ups that I'm no doubt showing you now. That is to stop all of the cymbals going up into the wall and then straight back in, so that the intention there is so that it absorbs all of the cymbal stuff, but it allows all of the low-end kind of power and rumble of the drum kit to hit the wall and come back, and it gives you a slightly more balanced kind of approach to the drum kit in terms of a room sound. That also, as you'll see when we go into the control room, is very heavily compressed. So what I don't want to do is bring up loads of like sharp kind of hissy sort of cymbal noise that you'd get. So trying to eliminate as much of that in the room as you can is the best approach for me. So yeah, other than that, the cymbals that I typically record with are normally my touring setup, which is what you can see right now. I have 15-inch dark matter hi-hats. I will show you what they look like, as you probably can't see. So yeah, there you go, they look like that. They are double fired. They are much darker sounding, much drier sounding. They have like a really complex kind of sounding wash on them, and I tend to find that when recording, most clients seem to like that, so that's kind of the mainstay. If a client contacts me and says that they kind of want something specific, then obviously I'll chop things out. I have a bunch of different stuff. So yeah, my hi-hats are 15-inch hi-hats, dark matter series. My left-hand crash is a 19-inch paper-thin Bliss series. I don't know if you can see it, but it looks like this. My ride is a 24-inch Bliss flat bell, so it doesn't have, well, it has a bell, but it's very, very small. It's great for crashing on, for really heavy, kind of big washy rock stuff. It's also got really nice stick definition on it as well, so you can ride on it. I then have a 20-inch vintage Bliss over here, which looks like this, if you can see it. And then a 19-inch Pang China. And again, all of this is completely variable depending on the song that I'm playing, depending on the client that I'm playing for, whether there's any special requests, anything like that. I have a whole host of stuff, and then the beauty of being endorsed by Dream as well is that they can send me things. If a client specifically wants something, if Dream have something that I can kind of go for, then I can call them up and they'll send it out and I can record with it and then send it back to them, which is awesome. I use these because they're, for me and to my ears, kind of the perfect balance between like a brilliant sounding kind of like very top-endy and crashy kind of like rock crash that you'd kind of find in your typical pop rock stuff, and they still have like a load of musical complexity based on them being kind of hand-hammered and all handmade. They're very complex sounding, and they have a lot of like kind of dark, warm tones. So yeah, that is pretty much all my drums and the way they are. I also have about 15 different snare drums as well. and a whole selection of other drums that all of it can be changed in and out. So depending again on the client and the song that I'm working on, that is all completely variable. But for the process, the purpose of this video, sorry, I just kind of showed you like my standard touring and practice and typical recording setup. So yeah, that is all of this. So what we will do now is run into the control room and I'll talk you through all the preamps, why I've chosen those, and then if anything's got compression on it or anything like that before it hits Logic, you'll see all of that as well. So I will jump in there now and I will see you there in a second. All right, cool. All right, cool. So we're back in my control room and we are just taking a quick look at my rack and the preamps that we've got set up for the microphones that I just showed you and talked you through. I guess we'll just start with the kick drum. So the kick in is the 52A and that comes into this, which is my Golden Age Projects Pre-73, which is a Neve 1173 clone. I use this for kick and snare. I have two. This for kick and snare because of how punchy and driven it is, and it really just gives like all of that kind of like thud that you want from the kick. So that runs into that. It then runs out of this through the top of my DBX 160Xs, and then, well, I should probably explain. So the entire studio is kind of run through my Claret 8 Pre-X here. So all of these external preamps route into this Octopre. The Octopre is then linked with the Audient ASP 800, and then these are linked together via ADAT and word clock into the Focusrite, and then the Focusrite goes to the computer, to Logic, and that's how everything tracks. So yeah, so now you know that. Let's break it down. So we've got the first of the two Golden Age Projects, Pre-73s, that is my kick in. That then runs into my DBX 160X, which is currently set to a 3:1 ratio, and the threshold is set so that it's only really doing kind of 3 to 4 dB of gain reduction, and that's really just to keep it in check. As I said, I'm a heavy hitter, and occasionally I might just put my foot a bit more through the kick drum, so it's just to clamp down on those ones that are just a bit hairy and kind of bring the dynamic range down just a little bit. Just to kind of smooth everything out. So that's what's going on here. This compressor as well for rock stuff, it's super aggressive. It's really, really fast attack and release. Super kind of like, aggressive is pretty much the best term for it. So yeah, that's why I use the DBX on that. And then the exact same setup for the snare drum, snare top. We have the second of these Golden Age Projects. And again, that runs into number 2 on the DBX here. And then this is on a 2:1 ratio, so it's doing slightly less. And then the threshold again is set just so that it's knocking off anywhere between kind of, yeah, 3 and 4 dB, maybe 2 and 4 dB, depending on the hits. So yeah, and again, kick and snare are the two. Like, I'd like to think I'm a pretty consistent drummer. I feel like that's kind of allowed me to get to where I am with my drums at the minute. But it's always nice just to make sure that you've got everything kind of in check. And then obviously, these add a sonic quality of their own, which is why I like them. So you've got a bunch of aggression that's coming through the preamps already, and then when you then send them into these add even more, as well as keeping all the volume in check. So that's what's happening there. So kick and snare, kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, snare. Right, then rack and floor. I use the Audient preamps 1 and 2 on this ASP 800, which is this silver unit here. Channels 1 and 2 on this have these rad like saturation circuits that you can punch in with these blue and orange lights. I'm assuming you can see that from where you are. If not, I will obviously get some close up as well. So I'll cut a close up in here. Here's number 1 and 2. Nice. They're basically just 2 different types of saturation drive circuitry. So you have a MOSFET style drive and then a magnetic style drive. And for toms, they, for me and my ears and the way I like them sounding, they just add loads and loads of like really nice like warmth and definition to my toms, and then further accentuate the kind of smack and the attack that I get from the initial stick hitting the head. That again is part of the reason why I like using clear heads and single ply and uncoated, because they just have this initial like really spanky kind of attack, and so it really allows the toms to cut through mixes. And for me, I always find listening to a lot of mixes that the toms are the one thing that I always struggle to kind of pull out from a drum kit. So as far as I'm concerned, the more you can hear them in the first place, the more you're going to be able to hear them in the final mix. So yeah, I go with as much kind of like kind of top end attack and smack as I can, and these just add that, and then they also just really round out the kind of low end of the toms. So you have this really nice kind of sounding, deep, warm, attacky, smacky, everything you'd want from a tom. So that's these two. So you've got rack in number 1, floor in number 2. And then the drives they're not dialed the same. It's, you know, the rack tom has a lot more of the MOSFET style drive, and the floor tom has quite a lot less of it. They're fairly similar on the magnetic style drive. So that's what's happening there. Then we move to overheads. The overheads come through this green unit, which you can see here. Again, I'll bang in a close-up of it. This is a custom-made API clone, which I had done by a guy in France, and I can't for the life of me remember his name. Great dude, really, really, really nice sounding preamps. I asked him whether he could try and clone some API stuff, because they have this really beautiful, like, open, airy top end without it sounding harsh. So for cymbals, it's kind of perfect. It's all the detail that you'd want, but it's kind of smooth, and you know, it doesn't really like jump out into your ears and kind of like sound pinchy. So there's nothing crazy going on here. I run obviously 48 volts goes through, and then there's a pad on both of these as well. These are quite hot preamps, so they bring in a fair amount of gain, so I want to just control that before it hits Logic or it hits my converters. So yeah, that's what's going on there. Then the first set of room mics, which are the SEX ones, which are kind of in front of the drum kit, facing the kick drum, kind of left and right. They come into this gold mic, which is a tube preamp. I had this, I say modded, by the guy that services all my guitar amplifiers. I asked him to switch out the valves, which are just some JJ valves, which are what you normally get in like kind of Hot Rod Deluxe Fender amp kind of thing. I asked him to switch them out for some Sovtex, which are Russian valves, and they are much like hotter, and they break up a lot gnarlier and a lot kind of grittier, and they break up a lot quicker as well. So in order to kind of push that breakup even more, I asked him to set it so that the gain pots on this get hotter a lot quicker, so you don't actually have to push an awful lot of gain through them before you start distorting the tubes. And again, this preamp only gets used for room mics. I don't think I have ever used it for anything else. I might maybe once have used it for like a really horrible sounding acoustic guitar that we wanted on a record for some reason, but yeah, it's mostly room mics, and they kind of get a bit crushed up. So that's what's happening there. It's not like really gnarly sounding. It's not like you put a distortion pedal on it or whatever. It is subtle. You'll hear it when I play them to you, but it's just a really nice kind of warm breakup on the top end. So that's what's going on with there. They also have this cool little flare circuitry on either channel, which is basically just like a kind of nice sort of sparkle on the top end. So occasionally, depending from track to track, that either gets punched in or punched out, depending on how much of that I want. Then the second set of stereo room mics, which are the 57s, they also come into my Audient. I can't, with these, like when I first did it, I was using condenser mics, and really what I've found is over the last like year of doing this as part of my kind of standard drum miking, it doesn't really matter what microphone you use. By the time the sound has kind of like got behind the drum kit, hit the wall, gone through the baffles and come back into the microphones, really all you need is just a microphone that's kind of open enough to capture as much of the information that it can coming back off the wall. And again, to match that, I just wanted to go for like a preamp that had character, but was like detailed and open and clean and not too kind of clinical and kind of ropey sounding, but you know, gave it a little something, but was still kind of clear. So that's why it just runs into 5 and 6 on the ASP 800, which is here and here. And then there's 4 other microphones. So there's the kick out, which is the sub kick, that comes into number 3, and then there's the snare bottom that comes into number 4. And again, for the same reason as these, neither of these I use for an awful lot of tone. I'm not getting most of my kick or snare sound from those mics, but I still want them to be like crisp and clear and you know, like just a usable kind of transparent signal that I can then do what I need to do if I end up mixing the drums, or the client can use quite happily if they're mixing the drums. And again, these two room mics, as you'll hear when I play it back, they do offer quite a lot of like low end punch, and it's the sort of room sound that I know quite a lot of people that I've worked with before have really liked. So I try and keep it as clean as possible so that if they want to add distortion and stuff, they're not, you know, their own type of distortion, their own type of saturation to that kind of stuff, or they want to overly compress it or do whatever they want to do with it, they're not having to compensate for anything that I've already kind of messed up in terms of, I say messed up, what I mean by that is like created a sonic kind of grit or like saturation to it. So, and that's the same with the kick and snare out as well. I just want those to be like kind of clean and transparent. So that just comes through the Audient. The hi-hat mic is just channel 1 of this Focusrite. It doesn't need to be anything special, it just needs to be a clean signal. So that just has a low-end roll-off on it that I think cuts off at about 80, maybe 60 or 80 hertz. So that's just getting rid of any kind of nonsense that you know, there's nothing in a hi-hat in that area anyway, so you can get rid of that before you have to then do it in a plugin. 48 volts on that. And then the very last mic is the smash mic against the wall, which is the TLM 103. And again, that is coming into this LA610 Mark II from Universal Audio, which is a tube preamp and compressor. Now the nature of that microphone is super sensitive, and obviously we're recording drums, very loud source signal, so my gain is normally set to -5 on the little clickable gain switch. So you've got +10, +5, -5 and -10. I then drive with the level, I drive a fair amount, and this is what is basically driving my compressor. So this then drives quite a lot into my compressor, and then my compressor is doing an awful lot, as you'll see when we listen to it. It's really crushing it and crushing the life out of it. Now the reason for that is the sonic property that this adds is this huge amount of kind of really nice like warmth and kind of low end sort of like drive and push. And so being able to have that as a little secret weapon that you can kind of blend in afterwards, it just brings up the kind of like aggression of the drum kit in the room. So yeah, what's going on here is there's 1.5 dB of 100 hertz. So this has a cool little 2-band EQ on it. So you've got a 7K setting, a 10K setting, and a 4.5K setting, up to 6 dB of gain boost or 6 dB of reduction. And then the same again, you've got 100, 200 or 70 hertz, 6 dB of boost or 6 dB of cut. So I've left the high end neutral, and then the low end is getting a 1.5 dB in 100 hertz, just smashed up again. And so that is forming this really like warm push, which you'll hear when we go into there. And then in terms of fold back, just so we've got that covered as well, I just run this Behringer headphone amp. I basically set up within Logic the click track that I'm playing to, and any stems or tracks that the band have sent me or the client has sent me, and that just routes through a bus send, which I then send out using Focusrite Control, which is the third-party software that comes with the Focusrite, to a dedicated bus output. And then that dedicated bus output is obviously routed out of this, and then this routes into that, and that sends through into my live room, and I just use a set of in-ears. And then yeah, everything, once I'm in there and everything's set up in here, everything is controlled via the Logic Pro remote that's like an iOS device app, and so I can run everything from there. And yeah, and then I just start tracking. So we will jump onto the computer and I will talk you through all the individual tracks, what they sound like. I'll show you how they sound now that you understand where they're all going, and then I will give you like a little splice between like the absolute raw stuff and then like the rough little mix that I'll send off to the client, just as a kind of slightly neater version of you know, like I usually blend it in with the guides that they give me just so they have like an idea of where it's going. And then yeah, and then they just get the individual mono bounces of every single mic to do with whatever they wish. Sometimes they'll ask me to, you know, they'll come back and actually ask me to mix the drums. Sometimes it just goes away and they can just do whatever they want with it. And so that is that. So yeah, we'll jump onto the computer and we'll talk through it. We are back in my control room, and as you can see, we are looking at what we've just recorded. So again, we have a kick in, kick out, snare top, snare bottom, rack, floor, hi-hat, overhead left and right, room left and right, and then we have those other rooms left and right, which are the SM57s, and then that wall microphone that's inside the reflection filter, the Aston Halo. So what we will do is have a listen to it and see what it sounds like. So this is it completely raw. All I've done is panned it slightly and just leveled it out so that it's kind of not all straight down the middle and 100% loud. So it sounds like this. Cool. So yeah, I mean that's how I pretty much go about doing it. What I will typically do at this point is, you know, let's just assume that this is a client that I've recorded for. I will do like a kind of rough mix of that, so that when the client listens to it, they have an idea of where the drums could go for their track. Usually when I've spoken to a client and they've kind of explained what they want, like I will do everything I can in order to get my source material kind of sounding as close to that as possible within the limits that I have. And then from there, I will do like a rough mix of kind of based on my assumption of where they're trying to get it. I will try and mix it to where I think that sounds kind of like it would work in the track that they're going for. And then I'll send them that just as an example. And then obviously they then get all the individual bounces of these tracks as stems, so that they can then load them into their DAW with the rest of their track and record everything else to them, or mix them in with what they've already recorded, etc, etc, etc. But if we just dive in, we'll just go through it kind of bit by bit, and I'll just show you what we've got. So in terms of kick, this is the kick in, so the 52A that's right inside the drum, slightly off center from the beater, and this is what you get. So nice and punchy, nice and consistent, and then that is blended with the sub-kick mic, which is running into the Audient preamp as we just showed you. That sounds like this. So yeah, I mean, it's not, you know, it's nothing to shout and scream about, but when you blend these two together and, you know, you've got your processing on there, your compression, your EQ, etc., this starts to sound like a really big sounding, full, punchy kick drum. Snare drum wise, this is the top mic, and it sounds like this. Now I'm quite a hard hitter, so it has a lot of energy behind every single hit, but not only that, the DBX 160X, now the reason I choose that is for rock recording, especially when I'm tracking rock drums, which is typically the kind of stuff that I get asked to track. It adds a huge amount of aggression. It's a super kind of fast attack and release on those, so it's just this really kind of big, thwacky sounding compression, really spanky, and I think it just helps really pull the kind of energy from the performance up. So the kick and snare together just is the kick in and the snare top, which are both running into the pre-73 preamps and then into the DBX compressors. They sound like this. So yeah, super upfront, loads of attack. Apologies for that. And yeah, that's kick and snare. Well, snare bottom sounds like this. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's a snare bottom. It's one of the saddest sounding things on earth. Rack and floor. Let's find. I think I played a little fill here somewhere. Maybe this. Yeah. So if we look at the rack and floor here. So yeah, that is my rack and floor. That is going through the first two channels of the ASP800 by Audient, which have got those two circuitries inputted and dialed in. Plenty of kind of nice saturation and distortion just to really bring out the the front end of those drums and make them hit you in the face. And again, I feel like a lot of times toms get lost in mixes quite a lot. So, you know, the kind of more you can make them sing before you even start mixing anything, the easier you're going to find it to put them in the mix. So that's what's happening there. So there's my drums. And then hi-hat. I think I did a little bit of hi-hat in here somewhere. Let's have a quick look. So yeah, it just sounds like a hi-hat mic. And it just allows you to kind of, a lot of people I know don't like the hi-hat, but for me it allows you to kind of space your cymbals across the stereo across the stereo image, so that you, for me, I mix from a drummer's perspective. Being a drummer, that's kind of how it's always been for me. So hi-hat to the far left, as you can see here, and then my overhead left, far left, my overhead right, far right, and then the same with room. So room left is kind of the more hi-hat side, and room right is kind of more the kind of crash side, my lead, crash and ride. So that's what's happening there. And again, this typically when I go to mix all of this, these the hi-hat and the two overheads will get bussed together and they'll all get processed as one thing. It kind of allows me to create that stereo image of the room that the drums are recorded in. It gives you that space. You know, almost as if you were looking down at the drum kit. You know, you can kind of see where the cymbals are, and I want to be able to hear that in the mix. So yeah, that's what's going on there. Then overheads wise, these are the SE5s. Yeah, the small diaphragm condensers, and they sound like this. So the reason I like these, like I mentioned, again, this is very much me trying to get separation in the cymbals. Like, I feel like they have a really focused kind of, I mean, they're a cardioid pickup pattern, but I feel like that cardioid is so focused that you know, they really produce the kind of stereo width in the drum kit that I'm looking for. And you can hear, you know, you hear the crash being hit over there, and you hear the crash being hit over there, and you can hear the hi-hat being hit on my left. And for that reason, that's kind of why I use them. They seem to be, over all the other mics that I've tried, they might not be like the same as using a Coles ribbon mic or, you know, some crazy expensive microphone, but that for me, these do exactly what I want them to within the space that I record. You know, they give me the focus in terms of like the image placement of the individual drums in the drum kit, and I feel like that's, for me as a listener, is one of the most important things. So that's what I have going on there. Then the room mics sound like this. I have put these around the wrong way. So as you can hear, they have a slight bit of kind of saturation on them, and that's for using that tube, the Gold Mic preamp, the tube preamps with the Sovtek valves in them, just helps them, like on that kind of top end. It takes away a little bit of the pinchiness, but adds this kind of nice warm saturation to them. So that's what's happening there. Then these are the 57s that I have pushed up against the wall behind the drum kit. So loads of kick focus in there, really nice kind of overall kick focus, and then loads of bottom end of the snare, so you can really kind of bring those into the mix to add the power and the punch below, and make sure you've got that focus, the space around the focus of your kick and snare, just to really help drive the mix. So that's what's going on there. And again, thankfully, because they're behind the baffles, most of the cymbals, kind of high-end, really top-end sharp stuff, is taken out by the baffles before they hit the wall as well, which is, as I was explaining in that last bit where I was walking through the mics, is kind of what I've done with this as well. So yeah, this is the wall slam mic, the one that the Neumann TLM-103, facing the wall with the baffle around it. It sounds like this. So really saturated, really crushed, really distorted, but loads and loads and loads of energy when it's brought back into the mix. If I play you all the room mics together, I mean, you know, there's almost an entire drum kit mix within that. And then again, if I bring the overheads in, so that's with the toms. So yeah, that is then what gets delivered to the client as individual stems. And again, like I say, normally the way I work with this is I will set aside a couple of days where the client knows that those are the days that I'm tracking their songs for or their parts, so that I can basically do all the stuff in a day, have it set up, do all that, send them this. They can listen through it. They have enough time to kind of make amendments, you know, if they don't like certain fills or they, you know, the pattern's not quite there or whatever it might be, you know, they'll tell me and I can just come straight back in. Everything is left set up so that I can just walk in, sit back down, retrack, make all the amendments, come back in, and then rebounce, resend off, and we'll do that until it's done. So yeah, that is my approach to recording drums remotely for clients on my own in my studio with the gear that I have. Any questions, comment, email, social media, all that good stuff. You can find me everywhere. Feel free to ask. If I've missed anything, I apologize. Again, just ask it in a question. I will do my best to reply to you and kind of get you flying with it. So yeah, what I will also do is I'm going to do a quick mix of this now so I can give you a demonstration of what I was talking about earlier. And then I will play it over the video that you've seen as well, so you can hear kind of where it came from and where I kind of hear it going as a drum mix for a finished track. So yeah, you can check that out now.